right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. What I think is about to be a very interesting panel. I think I know most of the faces in the room, but just to be on the safe side, my name is Andrew Clifford. I'm the director of our Master of Conference Interpreting here at London. And I'm very pleased to have a number of guests to introduce to you. We were fortunate enough that they were able to travel from places far afield. In some cases Luxembourg, in some cases a little closer to home, Ottawa, but we're very happy to have them here. I'm going to maybe preface our discussions by telling you something that you probably already know. So I'm going to make a bit of an understatement, and that is that our field, the language industry, is in a state of incredible flux. I think we've seen this already. A lot of the changes have happened already on the translation side of the house, and now there are lots of changes happening on the interpreting side of the house. And I've been asked our three guests to come and talk to us today a little bit about what are the changes that either they're experiencing already, or perhaps that they're seeing on the horizon and that they're busily preparing for. And I think those of us that are here in a student capacity, it's good for us to know about those changes. And if we're here in a professional capacity, you're probably aware of those changes already and having your own initiatives underway to compensate for them. So maybe this will be an opportunity for you to compare notes a little bit and see where things stand. All right, so without much further ado, I think I'm just going to simply turn over the floor. I realize I'm here without my notes, so I've forgotten who did we say was going to start. I think it's Kent. So I'm going to introduce to you Kent Johansson, who is with the multilingualism and, let me see if I get this right, external relations within the Directorate General for Translation of the European Parliament. And I'll just introduce Kent by way of saying that that I think he really has his finger on the pulse of a lot of what's going on, not just within the European Parliament, but other places as well. Kent is very active in his role, reaching out to both universities and to other institutions, and I find I often consult his vast encyclopedic knowledge on our industry whenever I get a chance to corner him at a conference or another sort of meeting. So without too much further ado, I'm just going to give the floor to Kent.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for having invited me to Toronto in November. but as I said yesterday, I'm a Viking, I have Swedish origin, so I'm not suffering too much from the cold here. Well, I work at the translation services of the European Parliament. I had the opportunity to speak to some of you yesterday, but for those I do not know here, just let me paint a bit of a picture of the environment we work in. In the European Union, we have different institutions, the European Parliament being one of them. We have 24 official languages in the European Union. Which means that our translation services and interpretation service are rather large. So the Directorate General for Translation, in our case in the European Parliament, we're talking about some 1,100 staff. And the other European institutions have more or less depending on their size. We do not only have 24 languages, but we do work in 3 different alphabets. Greek is one of our official languages, which means that the Greek alphabet is one of our alphabets. We have Bulgarian as an official language, which means that we also have the Cyrillic alphabet. And as I told somebody this morning, you should see our keyboards, they are very interesting. So it's a highly complex environment with a lot of strange combinations in all possible ways. As I said, our translation service is based completely in Luxembourg. That's for historical reasons. The European Union translators are all working either in Brussels or in Luxembourg. That's the 2 places where we have our translation services. But it means that it's a very big community in a small country as Luxembourg. We have a couple of thousands of EU translators actually living and working in that small country, basically the size of Toronto, the whole country. And I'm talking the surface, not the number of residents. Now, what's on the horizon? Well, we are a big organization. We are a political environment. When people need posts for something else in the administration, they tend to look to the translation services in particular, because they do, well, we need 20 new posts for another service here, so let's take one translator from each language and the problem is solved. It might be solved for them, but not for us, because we are losing the staff. And this is very much what we have been seeing over the last couple of years. We are losing staff one by one, slowly but surely. We have now come to a situation where it's a bit more stable, but we are being looked, we are being checked in a way that we have never been before. In the good old days, whether they were good or not, that's another expression, we didn't worry too much about how much we actually translated. We did our job, we had the things to do. Today, that's not how we can do it. We've been forced to start looking very much closely on things which I know the translators here hate. Productivity, how much do you do per staff member, what does it cost? Compare ourselves to the other European institutions, what do you do, how do you do it? So over the last, let's say, 5 years, we've been working very hard on getting figures and analysis going, which we can actually use. We can go when the budget committee comes and asks us things, we can actually show figures today. I took an example this morning. I think we needed new servers for our huge translation memory called Euramis. And at some point in time, it was 5-6 years ago, the budget committees came to us and they said, okay, this is very good. Can you please show us the use, the added value of having these translation memories? And at that point in time, it was too late to come with arguments of general saying, well, the quality is better and consistency. They actually expected figures telling them, you know, how much is the reuse? What's the real value of investing in these new servers? And this is one of the developments, an example of the developments we've seen over the last couple of years. There's a Spanish translator retiring. Today, it's not automatically replaced. If there is the Spanish translator retires, the Secretary General wants to see figures on the productivity of the Spanish translation unit. If the productivity is above a certain fixed average, the post will be replaced. If it's not, if it's under that average, the post will not be replaced. So that's the kind of pressure which we are working under, and a lot of things in the atmosphere have changed in that sense. That said, I also said that we have 24 official languages, and the good news in this story is that there is no serious debate on changing that system. You might hear sometimes, you read an article or you hear comments on saying the language services, that's far too expensive, they're far too big, we need to somehow reduce it. We're going to work in one language or 2 languages or perhaps even 3 languages. But 24 languages, that's mad. I can't go into the reasons now for the time of why we insist on working in 24 languages. But from our point of view, the good news is there's no real debate on saying we're going to reduce the number of languages. That said, we still have to keep tweaking the system in different ways by becoming more productive. And that's also one of the developments which we have over the last couple of years been very, very strong and which continues, and we don't know where it will end, and that's the use of technology and the use of translation memories, CAT tools, and other technology which has helped us a lot to increase the productivity. We work in the European Parliament with a lot of legislative texts, and they tend to come back in different parts in the legislative procedures, whether it's now a draft text, if it's on a committee level, if it's on the plenary Parliament, if it's a first reading, it comes to second reading, and there might be a third reading, and these texts tend to come back to us. So the consistent use and the compulsory use of translation memories have helped us a lot there today. I can say for legislative text we have an official, we now have the statistics and figures, we have a reuse of those kind of texts of over 30%, which is enormous if you look on the figures there. Now, that said, we will continue to have to twist the system. The 24 languages, they will remain, to be sure. But we do have to look at things. We have a legal obligation to translate a certain number of of documents into all languages. Other document types is a choice, and there we now and then have to have a look and say, we can't do this anymore. And then in contact with our political authorities, there might be decisions saying, okay, these types of text actually cannot be translated anymore, or maybe into 2 or 3 languages for certain types of text. One of these examples are the verbatim reports, procès verbal, from the plenary sessions of the Parliament, which used to be translated into all official languages. A rather big package after a plenary week, some 900 pages, which used to be translated into everything. Today they are only translated into English, in fact, which is not uncontroversial, but that is how it is. They're published in what we call a rainbow version, where everybody speakers, so if the Slovak member of parliament spoke Slovak, the text will be in Slovak, and then you go through all the languages, and then we publish an English translation. So that's one of the rough decisions which has been taken and which has not been very popular. When we talk about technology, and this tends to be the elephant in the room very often, that's machine translation. And this is coming big in all the European institutions, particularly in the Commission and the European Parliament. And just to make sure, when we talk machine translation, we are not talking Google Translate. Our translators are not expected to use Google Translate for all kinds of reasons, but it's a machine translation system which we have been developing ourselves between the Commission and the Parliament, and where the corpus, so all the documents fed into the system, are only EU documents, which means that we get very good results. Now, this is being implemented, it's still being developed. Some language pairs work very well already. Others will come and be better with time. In reality, how this will work, as I said, we are implementing it, but it's not ready. So if you work as a translator, normally you would get the matches from the translation memories first. When you work, in our case, we work with STL Studio. And what will happen in the future, if you have a segment or a paragraph there is no match in the translation memories, you will get a proposal from the translation, from the machine translation. Then for you as a translator to take or use or rewrite. So this is it. I mean, what we've seen on the technology side is that it's really the development of different tools are accelerating in an enormous pace. And therefore it's actually quite difficult to be talking about what's going to happen in the future, but we don't really know what it's going to be. But we do know that we will be using it, and we will have to use it. And it does help our work, both from a quality point of view, from a consistency point of view, but also from a productivity point of view. Now, somebody might say here, does this not make the translators into post editors rather than translators? Yes, it does. I mean, there's no way of getting around that. When we talk about our legislative texts, most of them, we end up having a lot of matches from the translation memories, in the future from machine translation. And in those positions, it ends up being a lot more post-editing than actually translation from scratch. And that is reality, and we cannot hide from the developments which are out there. That said, we also have texts where the translation memories are more or less useless. We talk about speeches, correspondence, we have what we call written questions to Parliament, where you basically have to translate from scratch. There, for the moment, there are no other way of doing it either, so that will continue. Another special EU challenge is, of course, that we already have 24 languages, and as if that was not enough, we do expect that we will add languages eventually to that bouquet. There are other countries aspiring to become members of the European Union, and different candidate countries all around Europe. So we will be adding languages. It won't be tomorrow, but let's say when we're finished, and that's far in the future, we could expect that we would have some 30 official languages, which is of course also a challenge for us. When you add a language, depending on which country is joining, it might be very easy to find enough qualified translators or interpreters. for certain languages, it's very, very difficult to find enough qualified translators. You know, in Europe we have very big countries and big languages, and we have some very small countries and some very small languages. And this is always a huge challenge. Just as an example, we have as a candidate country Iceland. Iceland has some 250,000 inhabitants and Icelandic speakers, and that's a very small population. And if we go in all the European institutions suddenly going to recruit a larger number of translators and interpreters, well, there's a fear that we will empty the island, basically. That's a bit exaggerating, but that's one of the challenges we would have. Now, Iceland, their universities, we've been lobbying with them for quite some time that you have to prepare, so because it's not for us to train the people, but you have to make sure they are there, and we will hire them. So we're not extremely worried, but just as an example. You have other countries and it can be bigger, well, not big, but bigger. I can take the example of Sweden. Sweden joined the European Union in 1995. And at the time, you did not really have a proper translation training at the universities in Sweden. You could study languages, and part of that would be a bit of translation, but you couldn't take a degree in translation. That simply did not exist. So therefore, it was not that easy, even though it's a lot bigger than Iceland, but not a big country still to find the people. So this is one of the challenges which we will continue working with. Even with our present languages, some of them are actually quite not that easy to find replacement for colleagues retiring, because in some of the countries they do not study languages the way they used to. That is very clear. We've had some examples, Danish, Dutch for different reasons. We also have, and people always look at me very strangely when I said we have problems finding English translators, English mother tongue translators. Since we are public administration, we have our staff translators need to be EU nationals. We have to find them, go to the UK and to Ireland to find them, and in particular in the UK they do not study languages the way they used to, a bit with the attitude, well, everybody speaks English anyway. So there we've been working a lot with them. And another challenge for the future, and now I'm getting into the speculative part of, and this is not necessarily the opinions of the Parliament, what I think we will have to do is to become, we're a European Parliament, we serve mainly the members of the European Parliament, the MEPs. And I think we have to start offering a much more personalized service to the MEPs in different forms. Up to now, an individual MEP has not been able to ask for a translation. It's always been done through a committee secretariat, through a political group of the member, but the member himself could not ask for any translations. I think these are things where we have to start looking at. Can we do that in some way? Can we give them a quota a year or a number of pages which they have to, which they can translate, have translated? We have a Secretary General who is looking very much in these directions for the moment, how to serve the MEPs better, and I know in particular on the invitation side they have been looking a lot at this and other services, but I think that will be coming to also. We have to look more how do we serve the MEPs. Another question where we're looking at the, well, already today we externalize, we use freelance translation for some 30% of our everything which is done. Basically the general rule, not absolute, has been everything which is legislation should be translated by our in-house translators for quality reasons, and everything else can be sent out to freelance translation if the in-house resources cannot cope with it. Now, I think in the future we will come to a situation where we will be using a lot more freelance translation. A lot of colleagues would probably not agree with me, but I'm quite sure that we will sooner or later have to go that path. And if we do so, I think we have to rethink our relationship with these freelance agencies. In our case, we do not work with individual freelance translators, but only with agencies. We have a system today where we only can sign contracts with freelance agencies through public procurement procedure, so call for tenders. And there we find it very difficult, and we've had an interesting debate this morning on how do you find the agencies you want to work with? How do you judge the quality of their work? How do you make sure that what they show when they give their call for tenders, how can you make sure that the quality they deliver afterwards are up to the same standards? And I think that's where we have some work to do. Now, being in public administration, we sometimes a very bureaucratic one. We have financial regulations which are pretty strict, but I think we have to look at it. A lot of our translation units, they find themselves, okay, there's a call for tender, let's say for the Finnish translation. They find an agency, and we look for agencies who can translate out of all languages into Finnish in this case. And in the beginning of that contract, they might not really deliver the quality we expect. So we work with them and we explain and we try to get them. And after 3 years, let's say, they deliver exactly what we want, and we can trust them and we know it's good. Now, our financial regulation says you cannot have a contract with anybody in more than 4 years. So that means after 4 years, you have to launch another call for tender, and there's absolutely no guarantee whatsoever that the same agency or bureau will win the contract. And I think that, but that's personal, I think we have to look at other ways of creating a relationship where we can work closer with the agencies to assure that we get what we need for the future, and also from a capacity point of view, because I think we will be going in that direction. So that's it. I think I've eaten up my time already, so I will stop there. And I hope I wasn't too negative. That wasn't my idea. I was just saying, you know, there is a lot of things happening, and we will have to look at this, but it shouldn't. The tone shouldn't have been negative.
So thank you very much, Kent. I paid close attention to some of the themes that you raised, things like accountability, need to make a business case, building capacity in new languages when necessary, outsourcing. All of those, I think, are familiar refrains, although they might take on a different cast in different places. Our next speaker is Donna Achimov, who is the CEO of the Translation Bureau, part of Public Works and Government Services Canada. The Translation Bureau, as you know, has been sort of a pivotal player within the industry for quite a while. There are a lot of changes taking place in the Bureau as well, and Donna's going to tell us a little bit about that. But I'll segue into her presentation by saying that we're fortunate that this is not Donna's first visit to London. We've learned a tremendous amount from her when she's come to us in the past to talk about the lay of the landscape, and we're eager to hear what she has to say again today.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you everyone here. Kent, it's great to collaborate with you, and we had a wonderful exchange this morning to see how even though we're in different parts of the world, how we're migrating towards very similar areas, and we're experimenting in the right kinds of ways. And Kent and I and my colleague Robin have agreed that much more exchange is going to continue to be needed in the future, especially as we each start to experiment in some of our new technologies. Andrew, I'm always happy to come here and exchange and dialogue with students. Those of you may know a little bit about the Bureau, but just some very high-level context. We are the federal government department's translation, terminology, standardization, and interpretation organization. You'll notice that my title is a Chief Executive Officer, and that sounds quite private sector-like. The Bureau is in a very unique situation in the federal government. We're a special operating agency, which means that the vast majority of our business operations have to operate the way a private sector business does. So we have to manage to a bottom line. We have to generate revenues, but we can't have a profit. And we have some dire consequences if we can't meet our bottom line. We do have a little bit of flexibility where we can have a bit of a line of credit, run a bit of a deficit, reinvest some of our funding. So that's the fun part of running the business. There's a small part of our budget that's given to us to do terminology standardization. That's considered very much core to the way we ensure official languages in the federal government. And then Robin Strang-Lindsey, who's our Senior Director of Parliamentary and Conference Interpretation, we have a small amount of money that's given to us so that we can support the House of Commons and Parliament. And we do that with closed captioning, sign language, as well as translation for House of Commons and interpretation for House of Commons and Senate. So it's an interesting cross-section of the business, and our funding models have been, I think, positive motivators, and also have been very sobering. Over the last few years, like many other organizations, we were in high risk, and our traditional business model was no longer serving us well. Departments have the right to choose where they go, and due to a whole series of circumstances, not all budget cut related, but changes in the way we are doing communications now in the federal government, and I think around the world, the influx of use of social media. We've consolidated our web presence and our presence online. People are being much more shrewd about what they publish and how they publish, and so we've seen a very radical decrease in our business. And we had to take some very, very drastic steps to make sure that we were being responsible in how we were managing our affairs. I have to say, 3 years later, we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. We've made a lot of progress in terms of understanding what our costs are, looking at productivity, understanding the way the language industry and the language business works. So removing some of the red tape, removing some of the background, the administrative rules and regulations that sometimes we self-impose, and really looking responsibly at how we're using technology. So today I want to talk a little bit about what we see in the future, what trends we're experiencing because of federal government departments and what they're asking for, and a little bit, I think, about maybe what some of the messages are to you in the room as students and as members of the language industry as well. So I'm going to just give you a little bit of just high-level stats. The organization is now down to about 1,500 people. We have a very active strategy to ensure that we have a ratio of in-house people, and we're moving more and more to working with the private sector. And so we're looking at very much having core business operations, core to government in terms of having centers of expertise and excellence, but we're really moving very much towards a model where we have a different relationship with private sector. So smaller organizations focused on core business but working with the private sector. We offer over 100 languages, including Aboriginal languages. Our multilingual component is very much a part of what we currently have today, and in the future we again are looking to have more of a network of private sector suppliers that can help us to manage the demand for translation as well as interpretation. We are also very much interested in the way the world is evolving and looking at terminology standardization. We're very much concerned about making sure that we have people with the right expertise in terms of looking at terminology. All of us sitting here, I think even this week alone, we're always amazed at how many new words are cropping up in the English and in the French language. How do we in real time look at determining what is the appropriate use of the language? How does it work in both official languages? And I think that's the exciting part of our world, where for the first time we're able to ask anybody in any part of the world at any time, what do you think? Now some of that points to crowdsourcing, and we're actively involved in experimenting and seeing how that works. The first part of terminology standardization involves consultation to begin with, and then you actually have your expertise come together. We're starting to see that there's huge possibilities in terms of looking at leveraging the wisdom of the crowd in those early stages, but relying very, very heavily on language experts to make sure that we're selecting the right words as they come into our vocabulary, and then standardizing the use across government. I love the fact that government departments come to us and ask us how we're managing and what we're doing, and so that's very rewarding, and we're doing that because of wonderful partnerships. We have little experimental groups. We're working with CBC, Radio-Canada, Office de Québec de la Langue Française, so we've got some partnerships that allow us to do some immediate real-time standardization as media stories break, those sorts of things. So we see more of that on the horizon. And I use that as a deliberate first example because I don't want people in the room to think that the future is, as Andrew and I like to say, the race to the bottom in terms of the lowest cost per word, that we're not looking at language experts. I think we are looking at language experts. I think we're looking at language experts who have huge imagination, who can think about some of the new ways of delivering and how we can leverage some of our social media and some of our platforms today. Andrew, can we show, I'm going to start with it's a 2-minute promotional video that we're using to talk to public servants in the Government of Canada, and I thought it would be a good backdrop for me to use to launch some of the other discussions that Robin and I are going to bring to you.
So I'm not sure whether it's cooperating with us, Donna. I've tried a couple of browsers now to load it.
Oh.
And it doesn't seem to be working for us.
Through your email? Just the link?
I clicked on the link.
Oh.
Web page is not available.
Okay. But it's not internet-based.
I can try a third browser and see if this is any differently for us.
We can make it available afterwards if we can't do that.
We're going to, as you may have noticed, we're recording this session, and so we can happily provide a link as part of the recording if technology is not cooperating with us right now.
Okay. So, I talked about the many changes, having to become more businesslike, adopting some of the technologies, actually mirroring a lot of what we heard from Kent in terms of being able to say, having workflow processes where we're able to understand how work comes in, using, we also have machine translation with federal government terms, using memory translation, again that whole life cycle, understanding how work comes in, what's been done before, how we leverage that. I'm very, very pleased with some of the technology that we've invested in. We've allowed the Bureau to expand quite radically in the area of allowing people to work from home. So we're one of the largest organizations in the federal government that's promoting telework. And we believe that that's hugely, hugely positive in terms of providing people with flexibility, home work-life balance, and we're able to leverage a network of employees from across the country, so we've got time zone differences. As opposed to having people work late hours, we're able to leverage our BC office late in the evening, our Atlantic office early in the morning. Our software allows us to collaborate, allows us to know who's working on which documents, and allowing our people to share in a very, very innovative way. We're really pushing the envelope in terms of the distance work because we believe that that's part of our future. Working with our supplier community, working with our own employees, and certainly working with our client organizations that are posted across the country and in some cases overseas. So that's one area that we're very pleased to be part of. Now we took a look at some of the tools that we're putting on our own desktops to manage our translation. So our machine translation, our memory translation, some of our interpretation tools. And we asked ourselves, could we not do more in terms of sharing these tools with the public service at large? We have a new initiative in the federal government that's prompting us to think about how we're going to work differently, and we called it Destination 2020. I also wear the hat of the champion for the federal government, trying to encourage more active use of both official languages. And our organization decided, despite the risk of reduced revenues, that we were going to put on federal public service desktops some of our tools, beginning with machine translation. So we're going to empower every single public servant to be able to have the ability to have, for comprehension purposes, the ability to use machine translation with federal government terms, very much like Kent said. We have millions of documents in the federal government repository, in Termium, and our various lexicons. We're hoping that that will instill the ability for people to embrace the use of both official languages and actually do some of the small text on their own, so up to 250 words. That has a direct impact in terms of our bottom line and reduced revenues. But we believe that that's the right way to go in terms of instilling a culture in the federal government of understanding the use responsibly of how we use some of these tools. Part of that responsibility is to educate the public service to say how important it is for us to get terminology back into our databases so that we can continuously improve the quality of the information that we get, and to have that responsibility where people know that as you translate and as you have new terminology, very much responsible to bring it back in so that we can continue to repurpose and reuse. And I just met with most of the senior leaders in government, asking them very much to provide us with their various and unique terminology data banks. So Justice Canada is sitting on a very large repository of information called Justicepedia, as well as some of our other scientific and technical organizations. So we're quite excited about the fact that this will be deployed on public service desktops. And as well, the next stage after that is to make it available on our internet site and make it available to all Canadians, and obviously in an internet capacity, just like Termium, to make these tools available to people around the world. We're also looking very much at how we instill the sense of what's doable with some of our technologies. And I'll talk now a little bit about interpretation. Due to very serious budget cuts, we've had to reduce our travel expenditures, how we organize conferences and special events. And it was seen very much as being very restrictive. Many of us are kind of pushing back that mentality and saying, why would it be restrictive? I think everybody here in this room, a show of hands, have we all used Skype? My brother is in Indiana. I love when I travel that I can actually call home and show my parents what the view is outside my window. You know, we're using Skype technology. We should be able to link with people across the country, and we should be able to do that in both official languages. So we're experimenting in quite a structured and large way in terms of how would we use remote interpretation, be it video remote interpretation, getting better at using some of the tools with simultaneous remote interpretation by phone, leveraging Skype. How would we do that? How could we possibly use voice recognition where we're in a conference situation with multiple parties across the country, and having voice recognition translate into text on the screen? So immediately opening up the ability for us to collaborate and be able to communicate with one another in both official languages. And here I have to say, pushing the envelope and having us being very sensitive to people with disabilities, sign language, hearing impaired. How can we leverage the use of certain techniques to be able to reach out to not only our employees, but Canadians with disabilities. Yesterday, Robin and I were meeting with our colleagues at Service Canada. Many people with disabilities and language barriers and mobility barriers are finding it very difficult to go into offices and to get information on pensions and disability plans. Well, some of the technologies now are allowing us to be able to support those clients and use technology in a very different way. And here I ask for a moment the importance of having that spark of imagination and common sense. So, you know, we talk about some of these technologies, and I think as language experts, we need to be open and to be able to say, this would be fabulous for a staff meeting where you want to connect people who are employees, you want to have fast, informal sharing of information. But you know what? It may not be appropriate when our Prime Minister is negotiating and signing the final trade agreement with a major trade partner. And I think that's what we all have to be better at. My experience has been that we put up barriers right away to say, oh my goodness, that won't work, we don't want to do this. But we've not been creative to say, how could we take some of these technologies, married up with our linguistic expertise, and how could we shape an agenda where we're changing a culture, we're changing the way we work, and where we're inspired to do things differently. Robin and I are looking at our conference interpretation radically going downhill because people aren't able to afford to organize conferences. Yet all of a sudden, with some of the technology, we're hosting virtual conferences. And people are coming together, and distance is no longer a barrier, and mobility isn't a barrier. So I want to say that we have the obligation to experiment responsibly, and that's certainly what we're going to be doing, what we have been doing, and what we will continue to be doing. And this is where also we need to have very strong relationships with our colleagues in the European Union, United Nations, and elsewhere to be able to say, what's working for you? What is happening? How can we leverage some of our collective experiences? And maybe I'll close by just saying that we also in the language industry have the responsibility, I talked about being curious, but to constantly do research and look at some of the trends in the industry. What are some of the major international firms doing in terms of leveraging language expertise? We're starting to see many, many language organizations merging and acquiring organizations with strong technology backgrounds. And so it doesn't take a lot of research to just see that the merging of technology and language is coming together. I'm starting to read more and more about many organizations having workers known as professional cloud workers, people who are located globally, who offer real-time translation regardless of where they are in the world. We're talking a lot about smart automated translation, which is, again, looking at large data and being able to use machine translation coupled with real-time quality post-editing using people as well as the machine translation. We're looking very closely at multimedia content adaptation, closed captioning. It's mainstream now. Many of us go to the airport and just look forward to watching the news and reading the closed captioning. We go to the dentist's office seeing closed captioning. How do we embed some of that in terms of our traditional business and create new business opportunities for ourselves? As well as computer-assisted technology. And I'd like to talk for one small second before I turn it over to Robin about what real-time means. I'll give you a very unfortunate situation and a very wonderful creative response. Tragically, on October 22nd, everyone is aware of the situation in Ottawa and the gunman that entered the House of Commons. 11 of our interpreters were trapped in various caucus rooms. It was a horrifying experience for them as well as the members of Parliament. I have to say, Robert and I have been incredibly impressed with the professionalism, the calm, and the savvy that our people had in one of the most incredibly difficult situations. Luckily, our people and members of Parliament were able to get out, and we learned a lot of lessons in Ottawa. Our people then were seized with the fact that Ottawa was taken by surprise by a lot of this. And on November 11th, when we had Remembrance Day ceremonies downtown, all of us decided we were going to go out in force and just basically be very supportive of our veterans and certainly what happened. And some of our translators determined that they were going to have to provide a service that we had never provided before. And that was instant, real-time translation to some of our law enforcement agencies. In the event of a crisis, we volunteered to be on the phone, to be able to translate immediately so our law enforcement officers would be able to send out messages, direction via social media in real time to citizens in the event that something were to happen. Now, I pride our organization on the fact that we have people who were smart enough, aware enough, understanding the technology, understanding the language industry to say, you know what, why, we're on call anyway, we work 24/7. Why wouldn't we be on the other end of the phone if, God forbid, something terrible were to happen, to be able to help real-time communication? I'm not suggesting that that's a business line that we're going to move into, but what I say is I was most impressed, as was Robin, by the fact that we had people who were starting now to understand what the needs are in a crisis, what the various avenues of communication are, which are very different. We're no longer issuing 5-page community advisories, that take, an hour and a half to read and to proofread and to send out. And so I leave you with that, which is, a little bit of a dramatic example, but I take it as a very encouraging example of how you can't do that on your own. You need the language profession. You need to have people who are sitting in this room who could think very differently about how we combine various language skills to actually make a difference. And I'd like to say in a very patriotic way, I think that's what enables Canada to play a very, very responsible Canadian role, and I think global role and cooperative role in the world. And I think each of you sitting in the room has a huge opportunity to help shape that role in the future. So I'm looking forward to our questions and answers and to having a bit of a dialogue on that. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Donna. Before we turn the floor over to Robin, we did have one other visitor here today with us, and I just want to introduce Julio Montero, who is the Director of Compliance and Regulatory Affairs with Able Translations Limited. I asked Julio earlier on what his portfolio had to do with the demonstration he's about to show us, and he said nothing, but that he's a jack of all trades. Some of our students will be familiar, I think, already with the Wiki platform that Able has put onto the scene, and so Julio is going to talk to us about the next step, I think, in that general direction.
Yes, thank you very much, Andrew, for that introduction. And we've distributed headsets and receivers because we are going to be demonstrating to you our simultaneous remote interpreting services. You'll see in real time today how technology has made it possible for interpreters to help us today without actually being present here. Okay, do you all know how to turn on and off the receivers?
Does everyone have receivers?
So tell you guys how to turn on now at the front.
Does anyone need, sorry, does anyone need?
Yeah, because we
No, we have extras here.
We have enough for everybody. I just wanted to explain how to turn it on, and I'll pass it on to the few people who came in after.
Of course. We need 2 sets, right? Okay.
Okay, sorry.
Turn it on, you just split the switch, and this is also a volume control. So if it's too low for you, you can just keep going up. I wouldn't go higher than 3 because it gets too loud. But it's up to your discretion. And is anybody else able? Or does everybody know? Alright.
So I'm sitting here because I need to be close to the microphone, as you can see, but I could well be sitting at the table at the front. So this is a short demonstration, a short presentation to show you how video remote interpreting works and what some public and private organizations are already doing and experiencing with. So as Andrew said, remote interpreting and the language industry in general is in a state of very rapid evolution. Remote interpreting has developed very quickly in the last 5 years. Initially, the first approach was hardware and software specific. You may still recall those video interpreting phones that some organizations were using. But again, there were many challenges in terms of that technology interacting with other technologies, equipment becoming obsolete, firewalls and the like. And that's how at Able Translations we developed a technology-neutral approach to remote interpreting. So what we have now, both for video remote interpreting in the consecutive mode and simultaneous remote interpreting, is web-based technology. All you need is a computer that has a camera, speakers, a microphone, and a high-speed internet connection, and it's all ready. And you are experiencing it right now. Actually, the interpreter can see me very closely. And the interpreter can also see the room, the interpreter can hear me, and you can hear the interpreter very clearly. And the interpreter is now located at our headquarters in Mississauga. So this is something that we developed in response to market needs. There were cases where interpreting was required, and it was simply not feasible to have an interpreter available at the location within the time frame or within the cost that our clients had available. So we responded to those market needs by developing remote interpreting technology. And we've seen in as little as 5 years how remote interpreting adds to the convenience, access, and affordability. There were many cases where interpreting was not being offered in the past because of time, because of distance, because of cost, and now we are basically overcoming all of those barriers with remote interpreting. So now we are going to show you a testimonial where you'll be able to see how the remote interpreting started and pretty much when organizations started considering this technology seriously.
Let's start from the very beginning. You have a business in a multicultural environment. You need an interpreting service to be able to connect your clients with qualified interpreters, and you need it at a moment's notice. So when it's time to meet your most challenging language needs, it's always ready. Simply select your language, connect with an operator, and speak face-to-face with the best qualified interpreters. All at the click of a button. It's that easy. Your connection is safe and secure. So it's time to enable communication. For your business, for your clients, anytime, anywhere. Because the world is a better place when we're able to connect.
Your During the last fiscal year, we welcomed the hospital's 4th president and CEO, a record-holding Canadian astronaut, aquanaut, and emergency room physician.
Hi, I'm Dr. Dave Williams, President and CEO of Southlake. From the moment I started at Southlake, I knew instinctively that this organization had mastered the art of caring for people and making their lives better. At Southlake, we're committed to being a high-reliability organization, placing safety and quality at the forefront of everything we do. We look for opportunities to improve the way in which we deliver patient care, and when we find them, we proudly share our results with others. In fact, during the past year, I've traveled from Vancouver to Europe, shedding light on many of Southlake's achievements and innovative culture, something I like to refer to as the Southlake Way. It's now my pleasure to share with you a number of highlights from the 2011-2012 fiscal year.
Southlake became the first hospital in Canada to introduce a new video interpreting service, allowing our healthcare team to effectively communicate with our diverse patient population. This new service connects patients with trained interpreters who speak more than 100 languages, including American Sign Language.
And in the same way as a number of healthcare facilities have embraced our technology, there are many other organizations in many sectors, in the private sector and also in the public sector, who are experiencing with video remote interpreting and actually using it for training, for conferences, and for many other applications where language services were not previously feasible. So now Able Translations is a Canadian success story. First, we developed Viki, as you know, that was a platform for consecutive remote interpreting. But then some of our customers started asking, well, is this possible for simultaneous interpreting services? And that actually motivated us to develop, again, a platform for simultaneous remote interpreting. And that's what you are experiencing right now. So this is a little bit of a diagram of how simultaneous remote interpreting works. We are here at, well, it can be a conference room, but here we are in a classroom. Then we have attendees on site. We may also have remote attendees. There is the ability for remote attendees to connect over the internet to this session as well. And then we have interpreters at a remote location. In this particular case, the interpreter is in our Mississauga headquarters. But then we can have multiple interpreters in multiple languages in different locations. It is a fairly simple approach, but there is a lot of ingenuity and technology in the background to make it possible without so many cables and without so much equipment. So this is a connection diagram again that we provided to the Government of Canada in a recent demo. Ours is one of the technologies that the Translation Bureau is currently experiencing with, and we are very proud to be considered. And so far the results have been great, very promising. Again, there are events taking place in this particular case at a museum in the Ottawa area. We had the on-site audience, and then we had interpreters who were located at the Translation Bureau. So now what I'm going to show you is a live feed of the interpreter that you are hearing right now. The interpreter that is located at our office at Able Translations. Just a moment, I need to go to here. So here You can see Joseph. He is our simultaneous French interpreter. He's right there in our Wiki center in Mississauga. So he can see me as clearly as I can see him right now. So he can see this picture you see over here, and you can see Joseph over there. Thank you, Joseph. So again, I was talking to you about two main things, access and affordability, cost savings. Remote interpreting can achieve very significant cost savings to public and private organizations, obviously in circumstances where remote interpreting is the right tool in the toolbox. I want everyone to understand that remote interpreting is just one more tool in the language service toolbox. Remote interpreting is not intended to replace on-site interpreting in all cases. Remote interpreting can actually broaden the scope of language services and can again achieve cost savings in certain cases. For example, there may be conferences that don't take place because in the cost of interpreting services make them prohibitive. Now with remote interpreting services, some of those conferences, some of those events can actually take place because there is a possibility of having access to language services at a much more reasonable cost. So the savings go from interpreters' fees to equipment and technicians, to flight, hotel, food, and you name it. So in many cases, and we took in this particular case a cost comparison for a 5-day event with 50 participants. 2 interpreters plus 1 technician on site versus simultaneous remote interpreting, which means 2 remote interpreters and just 1 on-site technician. And you can see that the cost savings are close to 50%. That is very significant. And again, as I told you, that there are clients in the public sector who are experiencing with the actually using the technologies, such as the Translation Bureau and some of its clients. We have private clients using simultaneous remote interpreting for their events. We recently had an event with Mars Canada. We had another one just earlier this week. And you can see the testimonial there. Thank you and your team for making the Mars AGM such a huge success. The quality of the interpreters and the effort in sourcing new technology has helped to re-engage our Quebec distributors by showing them they truly matter to Mars. That's a very nice testimonial. And then a Berkshire Hathaway subsidiary gave us a testimonial saying just a short note to say thank you for allowing us the opportunity to be part of language history at our recent distributors meeting in Tampa, Florida. The technology had tremendous financial savings for us, and our employees were thrilled with seeing it work. So in this particular case, the event was taking place in Tampa, Florida, and we had different languages being used at the same time. So we had remote interpreters across Canada, some in the West Coast, some here in Toronto, some in Montreal. It was just an amazing event. And this was all made possible through remote interpreting. The cost of doing this event with simultaneous interpreters would have been astronomical. So we enabled them to have a very successful event at probably more than half of the cost. Again, there are endless possibilities for remote interpreting in Canada. So we believe remote interpreting can help promote true bilingualism in 21st century Canada. It can enhance participant satisfaction at events. It can create operational efficiencies and increased productivity through savings. And it can help further eliminate language barriers from coast to coast to coast in the case of Canada. And there is also a great potential internationally. Remote interpreting enables simultaneous and interpreting services in general to be an export product, not only for Canada that has a very strong language industry, but for many other countries, including the European countries. So remote interpreting offers reduced infrastructure and cost. You can see here the setup is fairly simple. You don't see a booth at the end with all the time and staff that is required to set up that booth. The setting is fairly simple. It can actually be done by our clients. No technician is necessarily required to set up a simultaneous remote interpreting session, and obviously, as I showed you before, the cost in comparison to traditional on-site interpreting can be significantly less. And the savings bring with themselves increased access and demand. So since it is easier and less expensive to have access to language services, that automatically brings an increase in demand, which translates into further growth in the language industry, and good news for all of you who are language professionals, because this means the trend towards growth is going to continue, because the more services, the more language services, the greater the availability of language services, the greater the demand for them. And you've seen this in the text translation sector, and you're going to start to see more of this in the interpreting market segment. And a very good example of this is the variety of settings where interpreting was not common before, and where we are starting to see more and more. For example, in classrooms, we have many institutions now using language services to provide distance education. We have companies like EcoWater or Mars who are using remote interpreting services to facilitate multilingual global training. It's being used in boardrooms. We have public companies that have shareholders abroad that are actually using our services to facilitate board and management meetings. So the potential is great in reality. There is also the possibility of multi-site events and interpreting serving hubs, for example, as we are experiencing at Able Translations. There are days where there are interpreters in many different languages providing services for different events at our office. So the Translation Bureau may at some point become a hub for the provision of interpreting services for the government of Canada, and in the same way the European Union can adopt a similar approach by means of remote interpreting technology. And this all translates into further industry growth and more flexibility for language professionals, and again, more work. So it's all good news, and I hope this has been a good demo for you. I hope you've been also satisfied with the interpreting services provided. Thank you very much, Andrew, again for the opportunity, and to all of you. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you very much, Julio. The talk of interpreting and earlier maybe some references to finding ways to serve parliamentarians better is a nice segue to our final speaker. This is Robin Strang-Lindsey, who is Senior Director of Service to Parliament and Interpretation. Had the pleasure of making her acquaintance this morning. I understand that she's relatively new to her portfolio, and by way of providing context, I'll say that if I had stayed with the public service, Robin would be my boss's boss. So So without much further ado, Robin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you, everybody. It's nice to be back in an academic environment. It's fun to go back. And I said to my colleagues this morning, it's great to be back. I'm just glad I'm not back in school. But I think actually I don't have an awful lot more to add than what Kent and Donna and Julio have shown you. But I think as I've been in my position now 2.5 months. I am not an interpreter or translator by trade or by training. And I think that what has struck me the most since I've started in my new position is the just absolute professionalism of the people that I work with. I'm fortunate to work with every day. As Donna mentioned, we have a variety of clients. Primarily, we serve parliamentarians, members of parliament. We serve committees. And in the committees, we obviously serve public servants as well, which is all broadcast on CPAC. I'm sure many of you are aware of that, so everything is broadcast in real time and then is available as well on ParlView. So the level of precision and expertise required is very high, and this part of our business, which is appropriated, is here to stay for at least the foreseeable until they tell us otherwise. But I think what I'm very excited about is all of these opportunities and how our services can be broadened to line departments. So where policy and programs are debated in the House and in the Senate, the people in the departments who are developing the policy, developing the programs, and preparing the memoranda to cabinet and doing all the research need to consult within their own industries, among government departments, within jurisdictions, internationally. And I see this as something that's really grassroots in terms of comprehension, official languages, but as well as getting the business of government, the business to Canadians accomplished. And I think that that's exciting. And right now, and what I see is the interpreters facilitating this. And at the moment, we're piloting some interesting and exciting projects to the use of remote interpretation. We do quite a bit of it already, a telephone. We're not really there with the video yet, but it's something that the Shared Services Canada, which is the government-wide IT department, their part of their mandate is to put this technology on everybody's desktop within the next probably, well, 3 to 5 to 7 years, and that is yet to be determined. So this is going to be part of our day-to-day reality in the office. So what I think I'm most interested in, I don't want to say too much, is I'm really keen to hear, and I know Donna and Kent are too, to hear your thoughts and what you see your place in the interpreting, in the translation world, what your role is going to be, and your various interests. So without that, Andrew, I think you wanted to moderate. Thank you.
Absolutely. We have about 10 minutes in which we can have a few questions from the audience. So are there any questions out there for any of our 3 speakers today? Or perhaps any of our 4 speakers? Wendy.
Hi, my name is Wendy Green, and I'm an interpreter. I freelance for the federal government, and I'm a member of IEC, the International Association of Conference Interpreters. I'll try to be brief. Mr. Johansson, I had one question that struck me was you talked about translation, and it was very interesting. I didn't hear that much about interpretation. And also, actually, my question is more, you were talking a lot about developing tools. Yes, and I wanted to know, what are you looking at anything in terms of technology for interpretation? So that was my question for you. Should I just ask my 3 questions? And
Yeah, if you could, and then we'll let them.
Thank you very much, Ms. Achimov. Sorry, Achimov. How do you intend to maintain the levels of quality when you go out more and more into the private sector? Right now, or up until now, basically in order to be able to interpret for the federal government, whether one is a staff interpreter or a freelancer, there was an exam. There is an exam, I believe, still. And my question is, as you move more and more into partnerships with the private sector, what kind of mechanisms will you have in place to maintain the quality? I was also really interested when you talked about voice recognition and automatic translation of text. And I thought that was really interesting because, of course, it seems to me that the goal would be in the final analysis to just skip the interpretation part of it. So I just wanted to make that comment. I'm not sure where the technology is at yet.
Is there a question for Robin, or shall we let them respond?
And I think actually those would be my two questions. So what kind of technologies are you using for interpretation, first of all?
Well, the reason for not talking about interpretation is that in the European Parliament we have different services, completely different Directorate Generals. We have one Director General for interpretation and one for translation, and we are completely separated. We do talk to each other, now and then at least, but that's the reason why I didn't go into very much of interpretation. That said, they have also been going through quite a lot of changes over the years. I don't know exactly where they are with technology, but still how to use the resources more efficiently. That's they've been working on. I know they have been working a lot on planning of meetings. There has been much stricter regime on who can have meetings when, to basically pull them out over the week instead of only Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and on Monday and Friday there's nothing. So they've basically been forced to make it more even, to use the resources in a better way. And I know they've been working very, very hard on that and done quite an impressive job as far as I've understood. Also they're working on more strict things to see. They require from the clients, let's say a parliamentary committee, that if they know that the Lithuanian member of that committee will not be there, there will not be any interpretation out of or into Lithuanian also. So they try to make sure that they don't waste any resources whatsoever. So that's
Thank you.
Thank you. Wendy, thanks for your question on quality. I'm going to be general in terms of talking quality just for a moment about the translation as well as interpretation. In our dialogue and consultation with our senior leaders across the federal government, everyone's preoccupied with price and cost, absolutely. But I have to say, I'm very, very pleased to say that cost is not the only driver, that people are forcing us to look at and determine what quality standards are for both for all of our business lines, so for translation, for interpretation, and even for terminology standardization. The rapid pace that I talked about early on, people are expecting to have accuracy and consistency, so quality is huge. I see quality, and we're having some of the discussions. This is where we hope that we can leverage industry associations, the academic community, as well as our private sector colleagues and some of our own government client departments to be able to talk about how we set standards in a world where we are seeing shifts in terms of the technology. Robin will talk a little bit about what we want to do to ensure that we have accreditation and that we have that role to play. But quality now is being looked at in a number of different ways. I used to think quality was errors and grammatical errors and omissions and those sorts of things. And now we're starting to understand what our client needs are. Quality is being communicated as, do you know our client base? Do you know our preferences, not just in lexicon? The use of plain language. I'll give you a very, very concrete example. Parks Canada is trying to attract young people to our national parks across the country. The translation service that we were providing was impeccable, was excellent, but it was not in the tone and in the style that was suitable to an audience. So quality now for us is meaning a whole series of concentric circles, and that's why I think we need to have some advisory capacity that's not just internal to us, but that has our clients sitting at the table, as well as some of our colleagues in the language industry. And I honestly see that's where we can virtually reach out to Kent and some of his colleagues, because we're all struggling with the same issues of quality. So how do we come together? Robin will talk about the interpretation piece, but your comment about will we eventually move out of the interpreter if we can do voice recognition, in certain instances, yes. What we're trying to do now is with our machine translation build up our corpus so that when we have the voice recognition we can move directly into quality instant machine translation for certain things. I don't think for everything, and again, it's my earlier point, we have to realize when is that acceptable. So for certain things that may be very, very acceptable, for other things maybe not. And as language professionals, and understanding the business, we have to figure out when it is. And I don't want to say that we will do away with interpreters, because that certainly isn't the case. But could we leverage the technology, again, to be able to be much more proactive, instant, multilingual? And again, you can see the uses in airports and other areas where you need to be able to communicate quickly, efficiently, in a number of different languages.
In terms of the quality, just to build on what Donna has said a little bit, there are certain clients for whom where remote interpretation would not be viable at all. And these again are for parliamentary debates, high-level treaty negotiations. There are liability considerations we have to think about. There are Supreme Court. We have a very small, very core and dedicated team of people who interpret the Supreme Court proceedings. And there are all these adjunct liability issues aligned with that. But there are opportunities. We had another example is a couple of years ago, providing visual interpretation services remotely to appeal hearings for offenders in Alberta, in institutions, in federal institutions. And the ability to do that remotely was kept the interpreters safe as well. We didn't have to worry about their security within federal institutions. And as well, the quality is very good. So there is no plan to do away with any sort of accreditation. This is critical to maintain the high standards that we are known internationally for. And but it's to broaden using the accredited to work on la relève, build on the skills of younger people, newer people coming into the métier, to offer the services on a more broad level, as Donna has spoken about and as I previously mentioned, within line departments, different types of services.
First Khaled and then Rula.
Yeah. Thank you for the great presentation. My name is Khalid and I'm an Arabic interpreter and interpreting instructor here at Glendon. And I advocate for the rights of interpreters. My question is about the interpreters, because as you mentioned, guys, that the interpreting industry is under disruption. It's in a flux, and it's opening opportunities and challenges for everyone in the industry. For example, the idea of technology allows us to access interpreters from all over the world and bring them to Canada. So how we can make sure that the rights of the interpreters here, for example, are protected, because already there's a lot of exploitation in the industry in terms of cancellations of assignment, delayed payments. So how we can protect the rights of the interpreters and that they are considered and they are brought to the table to be addressed. So they can have a certain level of well-being that they can give and provide a contribution to the industry.
I think part of that question has to go to industry associations. I mean, we're a player in that, and we have very strong commitments to making sure that we have a trained, skilled workforce that is given working conditions that are safe, that are secure, and that allow us to accomplish the goals of the day. We're very much vested in making sure that we treat not just interpreters, but all of our partners and our employees in the same way. So I'm not sure how more specific you want me to be or how I can be, but I just think that it's very important that we ensure, it comes back to Wendy's question, that we set quality standards, that we understand the skill sets, that we articulate the skill sets, what we're expecting, and that we respond accordingly, and that we provide the necessary conditions, the necessary equipment for people to be successful in delivering for us or on our behalf.
I might add just something brief on that. And Donna mentioned on October 22nd when we had 11 interpreters who were locked down on the Hill for about 13 hours. And what we spoke at length about a couple of days afterward is their knowledge, and a lot of these folks have been around the world. They've been in conflict areas, and they know the risks they take when they do the job. They're physical risks. The issue that you spoke about payment, that's something, again, I think Donna's addressed that. But there's a certain amount of recognition that they could be in situations that are not the safest. And what we're looking at, there are other organizations using remote tools to safeguard our people, either troops on the ground, as well as the interpreters that are ensuring the accuracy of the information that our troops are getting on the ground, and it's being transmitted back to sort of safe areas so that we can validate that. And I think that's something it's just a nature of the business as well, depending on where you are.
Yeah, I have two questions. I know that Donna, you represent the Language Industry Association, and one of them is, how do you see the impact of the CETA agreement, the European Union-Canadian agreement that is coming up, I believe that next year during the summer? What is the impact in the language industry? And I recently learned that the exception clause for the cultural exception is not there. So how do you see that happening in Europe and in Canada? And the second one, you both refer to quality. How do you see the ISO 17100 being one of the tools for you to hire, the TSPs or ISPs?
I don't know, you'll have to interpret what ISPs and TSPs are.
Okay, translation service providers and interpreting service providers.
Thank you.
Sorry. So that's basically the ISO standards, the 17100 is coming up very soon as well. And in Europe, it will replace the EN 15038. I doubt it will replace the one in Canada. But how can you use that one for the purposes that we're talking about hiring private sector companies from this side?
Well, we're addressing two matters which I don't have a clue about at all, but I'm going to try to say something anyway. I mean, I don't know exactly what it says in the free trade agreement. I mean, there's quite a long process before it's not going to be ratified everywhere. So I really cannot say anything on what that would mean and how that would, what it says for language services. I must admit I didn't prepare for that, so I can't. But I will look into it. I promise that. For the quality standards, that's interesting. I mean, there's been a lot of call, at least in Europe, to update the standards because it's been not up to par of what we need. And again, I'm not the expert on our external translation services, but I'm quite sure that our colleagues we have in the Parliament an external translation unit who deals with all of this from the preparing call for tenders for contracts and the daily business with our freelance agencies, and I'm sure they have a better picture of that than I have. So I'm very sorry, but I really can't really say much about that. You quote me.
I'm in the same boat. I was preparing for students' questions, so I was really geared up for the students' questions, and I thought if the students gave me a hard question, then I was going to have to go back to the principal's office and do some work. Lola, we are, Lola and colleagues, seriously, I think this is something that we are looking at. We're having some dialogues to understand what those cultural exceptions are. It is very, very early days, and so I would be irresponsible to be commenting on that. We're tracking that. We want to understand what some of the impacts are, positive and perhaps negative, in terms of looking at what cultural exceptions are. We want to understand what the opportunities are. And it's this trade agreement. We have another series of agreements coming. The Pacific Trade Agreement as well holds a lot of opportunities. So we need to be able to stand back and take a collective look and see how that plays in terms of the way we contract, but also what that means for the Canadian industry. So that's something we will be working on as well.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, I think that we've gone over time at this point, so I'm going to suggest that we end the formal portion of our talk today. I know that our 3 speakers and perhaps 4 speakers have indicated they might be willing to spend a little bit of extra time talking one-on-one with people if you so desire. But why don't you join me now, please, in thanking all of our presenters today for